of you co-hosts should be able to
We're
start
being
it when you're
live.
ready.
Weirdly, I was a co-host before, and now I signed in so I could have my little picture.
Oh, okay. I'll remake you a
And
co-host.
I may not matter. I just wasn't sure whether that happened.
It's just good to
I'm not in charge
for
of
all
it.
the.
So apparently we're already live streaming on YouTube. Yeah. Wow.
Hey everybody, I just want to introduce myself, Peggy Greisinger. I'm the facilitator. Oh, it's fascinating to watch the captions. Oh, this is distracting. Does you watch the captions say what you're saying and they get it wrong sometimes? Sorry, I'm not going to look at that. I will be doing, so I'll just do a quick little intro before you guys take it away, just to tell everybody the basics of the program and stuff.
Becky, you can, I think, turn off the transcription if you want to not see it, and you can also drag it around so you can move it away.
Good to know.
You can hide the transcription, but let's not turn it off. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. No. Yeah.
Hey, Diane.
Good morning.
Well, I'm glad my audio is working.
Yeah.
One hurdle passed.
Yeah, as long as no sudden power outages or anything like that.
Yeah.
Welcome to everybody who's coming in. We'll get started in a few minutes at 9 a.m. Eastern. Okay, well, it's 9 a.m. now Eastern time, so I figure we might as well jump into it. People are kind of trickling in, but I think we can get started. So welcome to, let me start the recording. So welcome to How Do We Do This GLAMs, modeling out data from the artist files to the Zs, zebra genomes, Zongyu Ren, Zulu Kingdom in the Smithsonian Institution. The session is being live streamed to the LD4 YouTube channel and recorded and will be saved on YouTube for future viewing. There's some useful resources on this intro slide, including the code of conduct, how to join the conference Slack, and the collaborative conference project, and the names for the tech support channel in the Slack, as well as the Twitter hashtag. Participants can ask questions using the raise hand function or Zoom chat. And we'll be skipping speaker introductions this time due to the number of speakers. So I will just hand it over directly to the Smithsonian group.
All right, so can we put up the first slide? All right. Hi, I'm Diane Shaw, the Special Collections Cataloger for the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. We would like to start our presentation with a land acknowledgement. We gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. We invite people to put into the chat any land recognition they would like to provide. The Smithsonian's Administrative Center in Washington, D.C. is on the ancestral lands of the Anacostans, also documented as Nacotchtank, and neighbors the ancestral lands of the Piscataway and Pamunkey peoples. Right, next. So the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives team presenting today and I want to welcome you to this workshop on modeling out data for galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, known as GLAM organizations. We will be presenting on work that has taken place primarily since March 2020, when most of the staff from the Smithsonian pivoted primarily to working from home. Previously, the Smithsonian had taken some small steps over the years towards embracing the potential of linked data, including work done by and with Wikimedians and residents, the Open Access Initiative launched in February 2020, and the implementation of a linked data macro process for the library's catalog records. The shutdown caused by the pandemic created both the need and the opportunity to focus on virtual projects only. Our work from home setups have enabled us to collaborate closely on what had been formerly a sort of back burner initiative to rethink how the Smithsonian's amazing variety of collections and research could be made more coherent and discoverable through linked data for the benefit of the Smithsonian staff, as well as the wider global audience interested in our GLAM resources. This presentation features a team drawn from various units of the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, including descriptive data management, metadata, resource description, and research services. Many other Smithsonian staff members have also helped with these linked data efforts, ranging from information technology specialists and curatorial staff. Our efforts have been enthusiastically supported by the Libraries and Archives Administration as well. In addition, our efforts have been boosted with help and advice from the Wikibase development team at Wikimedia Deutschland and other Wikimedians, as well as numerous other persons and organizations involved in structured data and linked data projects for GLAM organizations. The Smithsonian's world of data covers many different kinds of entities, living up to and beyond the cliche of being the nation's attic and honoring the wishes of our founder, James Smithson, to be an organization working for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. Founded in 1846, the Smithsonian has 19 museums, gardens, and a zoo, as well as research centers ranging from specialized libraries and archives, an astrophysical observatory, ecological and biological laboratories, to a museum conservation institute. Units of the Smithsonian are mostly based in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, but there are also research centers in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Fort Pierce, Florida, Belize, and the Republic of Panama. The Smithsonian's activities include not only museum exhibitions, but also programs like the Global Genome Initiative, the Global Volcanism Program, and the Recovering Voices Program to document and sustain the world's endangered languages and knowledge. As you might imagine, it is an extreme challenge to develop a knowledge base that can contain such disparate kinds and sources of data. But the need for such a resource has never been greater to show the public and the federal government, which largely funds the Smithsonian, the value of the services that the institution provides. All right, next.
Thank you, Diane, for an excellent overview of our world of data and Wikibase Wikidata exploration. I am Jackie Shea, the Descriptive Data Management Librarian, and I would like to share with you the genesis of our project. It all began with a simple desire. How might our work on name authority serve colleagues in collections throughout the Smithsonian? Names have been collected over time in disparate datasets across the institution, such as the artist files in the libraries, archives, and museums. These names represent artists, scientists, researchers, including organizations, units, and also artifacts, specimens, and many more. What they all share in common was that they desperately need reconciling. The preferred label for the same name varies from unit to unit, not to mention the ones in non-Latin scripts. A name reconciler project began in May 2019 by surveying platforms that might hold potential solutions meeting our needs. Additionally, we hope that the possible solution would also provide a broader appeal to non-metadata professionals to engage them in the descriptive data work. So the reports coming out of Europe, European National Libraries experimentation on a linked open data platform such as Wikidata, Wikibase, highly encourage us to seriously consider the Wiki platform. So the following year, when PCC launched a call for participation in a Wikidata pilot, it affirms the direction where we were heading. Participating in this pilot, the libraries have 5 projects underway: African ethnic groups, artist files, Chinese ancestors portraits, Dimna scientific portraits, and the Smithsonian Research Online. Our projects center on names for persons, people groups, organizations, and the units within the organizations, names that are also in non-Latin scripts. We learn about the relationship among them, how they would or are not to relate to one another, presently and historically. How should the data be modeled addressing ethical concerns that may collide with our internal policies? What methods to put in place addressing curatorial needs over the long haul? And will a local version of Wikibase instance satisfy the inferencing need that we have already identified? So we began. We began with user stories. Most of the team members hadn't really needed to think about data modeling and what it would entail. To ensure we start with a basic competency, we dissected the user stories together, collected for different projects, examined them to define, identify, and build what we would need to apply properties and the constraints associated with the properties in the Wikidata ecosystem. Our services include outreach programs to the young elementary school kids and the very talented, knowledgeable scientists and postdocs who seek in-depth knowledge on a given discipline or any interdisciplinary endeavor. Wikidata offers a flexible data model. Descriptive entities are constructed through properties, qualifiers with constraints. There are ample options that would allow us creatively created ways to connect users to their appropriate level of research needs. Each and individual projects first determine the necessary minimum core set to a more extensive version of property to apply. We tested various UI preferences, including widgets and user scripts to facilitate individual editing ability. Aiding us further in this process were the tools like Google Spreadsheet and OpenRefine. They have been tremendously helpful for us to organize and reconciling our data. Wikidata APIs such as Mix and Match, Listeria, Scholia, Quick Statements, and many more expanded our process capacity. We were given plenty of opportunities to think big. A 10-team larger set for reconciling and load. Collaborating on a network version of OpenRefine simplified project handoff and pickup. We experienced ups and downs through this process. They were primarily from the application of properties and constraints. Ethical issues, historical backdrops, political climate influence how our claims ought to be constructed. Is there a right way of doing it or a wrong way of doing so? Whatever the decision we arrive to will no doubt impact the outcomes of our Sparkle queries. Much await us, and we are so delighted you are here with us. Catherine Phillips will introduce our first example.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm Catherine Phillips, a cataloging and reference librarian working at the Freer and Sackler branch of the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. I work with the library's collection on the arts of the Middle East, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. For those of you who don't know, the Freer and Sackler is Smithsonian's Asian Art Museum. It has a world-class collection that brings a steady stream of local, national, and international researchers to our real-world and virtual world doors. As a reference librarian, trying to help people retrieve information about resources that I know we have at the Smithsonian can be frustrating. Objects, books, papers, photographs, e-resources, and data sets are scattered across the museums, the collections, the units, the offices, and are described using a variety of metadata vocabulary and conventions. The idea of using open link data to more efficiently and more reliably surface this information is very exciting. The Chinese Ancestor Portrait Project edited and created some Wikidata items for a Freer-Sackler Gallery's collection of 90 ancestor portraits, representing members of the Qing imperial court and social elites. The goal of the process was to use this small, defined group to explore how we might model data for individuals of other times, places, cultures, and languages in a way that would fit within the larger Smithsonian data set, but would also be able to surface information focusing on the unique parts of our collections. So on the next slide, let's pause to look at a few of the Wikidata properties we found important in modeling out this collection and some of the issues related to settling them into statements. As mentioned earlier, the Smithsonian's PCC Wikidata project grew out of looking for a way to address our name authority needs. With the Chinese Ancestor Portrait Project, modeling data for individual names meant modeling data for family names. In China, what the family is needs to be understood within the context of Confucian thought. The family contains the most important relationships for individuals and forms the foundation of all social organization. In Confucianism, the 5 most important human relationships are sovereign, subject, husband, wife, parent, child, elder brother, younger brother, and friend, friend. Our project team's efforts to add data to the entities represented in the Freer and Sackler portrait collection meant trying to populate the items with names and relevant data from these 5 categories of family. Wikidata items for individuals like the Qianlong Emperor well populated with basic biographical data, but many of the other items for lesser known individuals had only 1 or 2 statements, or there was no item at all. That meant that the team members spent a large amount of research time identifying basics like family name, given name, birth and death dates, and family members. Many of these individuals had also birth names, temple names, posthumous names, or honorary names, in addition to family or clan names. Women kept their family names and did not usually take that of their husband. Given names were generally missing from many of the items. Language also complicated our data modeling. During the Qing dynasty, a period when the majority Han Chinese were ruled by the minority Manchu, many court officials and elites had individual names, family names, and clan names in both Chinese and Manchu. All of the messy, missing, and variable family data has left us concerned about how we will link these families in a way that will produce meaningful search results, like Sparkle queries. We wonder how the lack of inference within Wikidata will impact our ability to discover related family. We want to know how to streamline and automate what is currently a research-heavy workload gathering data for these underrepresented individuals. On the next slide, I've listed a couple of individuals and families from the Qing dynasty in order to illustrate to you some of the name problems we encountered. And forgive my butchering of Chinese. I'm phonetically challenged in all languages. First, the Qianlong Emperor, who his dates are 1711 to 1799, was the 5th emperor of the Qing dynasty. He was born Asinjiro Hongli. His family name was Asinjiro. Asinjiro uses Manchu naming customs, meaning that the subclan's name is Asin and the clan's name is Jiro. Asin means gold. It corresponds to Qin in Chinese. Jiro refers to the clan's ancestral home. After the fall of the Qing Empire in 1912, most members of the clan changed their surname to the Chinese form, with Jin being the most common form they used. Both Chinese and Manchu forms of the emperor's name are used in his Wikidata item. If, for example, you look at the statement for birth name, so P1477, you see that it has both Manchu name with Mollendorf transliteration and the Chinese form of the name with Chinese characters. Both Manchu and Chinese forms of his birth name are flagged with a single value constraint. The posthumous name for the Qianlong Emperor has both Chinese and Manchu forms of the name, but no constraint flags because the properties, writing system, P282, and in the case of Manchu, the Mollendorf transliteration, P5139, have been added. We discovered that the constraint flag on his birth name is only a quote unquote suggested constraint, and that you may add multiple values of this property when the person has birth names in multiple language, but you must qualify it indicating different language versions. So we've learned a lot going through this. Consort Qian's family name was Liu. She was a member of the Han Chinese Liu clan. Her given name is Xian, excuse me on this one, Xian Yu, and it is a known name, but it has not been added to her Wikidata item because we also need to create an item, a Q number for the given name Xian Yu. This is an extra step that we find we need to do for almost all the cases where we need to add a woman's given name. Actually, the woman's name is her title, one of her titles. Her titles changed as she was promoted from Lady Liu Jia Xian Yu to second class female attendant Liu, 8th rank consort, then noble Lady Liu, 6th rank consort, then concubine Qian, 5th rank consort, and finally during the reign of the Qianlong Emperor, consort Qian, 4th rank consort. So there are some naming problems for us. For the Li clan of Longxi, the Li clan of Longxi has the part P2670, House of Li, which is an imperial clan of the Tang Empire. With clan and or family names such as this, we have had difficulty determining which to apply to an individual or when to apply both. Further complicating what we understand as family structure is the fact that the name Li was given by the rulers of the Tang dynasty to a large number of heroes and foreigners not related by birth. This was a common practice for bestowing honor on someone such as a successful military general. The Gong family was a multi-generational Han Chinese family. In the Frafra ancestor portrait for this family, a hand scroll, part of which is shown on the slide, at least 3 people are biologically related, but one is just a friend. Gong Xian and Gong Shi were 2 friends who admired each other. We did settle on using a property for this called nominal kinship finally, but again, that kind of hung us up for a bit trying to figure out how to handle that. And then just to mention briefly, Xing and Shi. They're 2 distinct Chinese surnames in ancient China. Xing, or Xing, an ancestral clan name, and Shi, which were branches of a tribe or clan. Later, Xing came to refer to the surname, while Shi was often used to refer to the clan name. Also, the 2 terms have been sometimes used together as Xing Shi, or family names. Currently, most Chinese surnames or family names of Xing were originally Shi. The Wikidata statement for Shi, the Wikidata item for Shi has a statement with the property part of and the variable Xing and Shi. The item also has a property different from the variable Xing. These are accurate statements in part, but they do not describe the changes in the relationship between these 2 names over time. So please take a look at our questions on the next slide. We could use some help. As I hope I've made clear, the object of the Chinese Ancestor Portrait Project is not only to make sure that we populate these items with the correct biographical data, but we need to determine how we can effectively link these individuals to one another and to the larger historical period. And what about language? Can adding aliases help us? And how much should we add to the item as statements? What do we do about constraints? Usage guidelines sometimes seem to have a distinctly Western cultural bias. And what do we do about sort of building in inference? In the absence of a lot of basic information and without inference, how do we ensure that some of these lesser known individuals are included in search results? How do we ensure that related objects named differently can be surfaced together? So thanks for listening. Next up is Sex and Gender, brought to you by Richard Naples. Richard?
Hi, thank you, Catherine. My name is Richard Naples, and I work in the metadata department. And one of the primary things I do is work on our research online project tracking all the research output of the Smithsonian, and with that, tracking the researchers themselves. So I'm going to talk about sex or gender, the property that has given us a little pause. What do you do when your data sources don't explicitly include a property that you may want to track? It makes modeling kind of tough. We're using Wikidata, of course, as a place to push our own open access data so that it becomes more useful to the world. But more importantly, our pilot really is about using the platform as a way to understand linked data and how Wikidata does it, so that we can create our own Wikibase with lessons learned so that we can implement linked data so it works for our needs and our purposes. And the property for sex or gender, P21, is one property that we have not resolved really as a group. Many of our current data silos do not explicitly track sex or gender, nor many other properties we might be interested in. So we're faced with the question about whether or how we should include them. And for this property, I kind of see three considerations where sex or gender property has given us an issue, and that's the ethical, the conceptual, and the operational. Well, I know we're not going to figure this out today. We hope to get some insights from this group, from you all in the chat or in the Google Doc. And at the very least, we want to talk about this and bring the conversation forward about, you know, the ethics and the considerations of gender or sex. So the first part I'm going to talk about is the ethical considerations. And really one of the primary ones is why we include gender or sex at all in our data model. Do we have to? You know, one of the things about it is if you can't explain why you need to collect something, then is there really a basis for doing so? And so what are the implications of collecting gender or of not collecting gender? And in my mind, one of the biggest risks of not doing it, not collecting gender in your data, is that we lose the ability for users to begin to address historic exclusions and current disparities. You know, in my area in publishing, you know, the pandemic there's been plenty of studies showing the ways in which the pandemic has been very unequal in terms of how it has affected people of different genders. And then there are two specific areas at the Smithsonian where that would be the American Women's History Initiative, which then is related to the second of the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum, which was recently approved by Congress. That there's real real research need to track gender or sex within our data for these purposes. And one other area that's very important is there's a Funk list, which is a crowdsourced list of Smithsonian women in science started by Smithsonian botanist Vicky Funk. And this list has really inspired work in our data science lab and has spawned different Wikipedia edit-a-thons, and it's been very useful for considering gender in research. But again, it's not an official list. It's a crowdsourced thing that's, you know, kind of been maintained and not necessarily through informed consent. So on the one hand, you know, there are real concerns about privacy too, and being respectful for people whose gender information would be going to a very public data set. And indeed, sex or gender is on the list of properties that may violate privacy. And that's something that we take very seriously at the Smithsonian. But on the other hand, you know, with initiatives about gender equality and American Women's History Initiative at the Smithsonian, not tracking gender could stymie analysis and could really obscure the sexism and its impact, you know, even, you know, let's be real, within the wiki world itself, where there's a lot of problems with who gets described and who's doing the describing and how that plays out. And of course, the other little part of this is that, as Catherine was talking about, we're just sometimes describing people who are long gone. And so, you know, they can't really proactively describe their own gender. And so that becomes a problem too, of like, you know, people are dead and what do we do? So the next area that I see a kind of concern is conceptually, and you can go ahead to go to the next slide, of like, before we even consider it, the ethics, you know, we have to consider the property of gender or sex as its own concept. If you like, there's a discussion page for it, you know, on the Wikidata property page, you'll see that there's a long history of conflicting ideas and discussions about what this property should be. And as we navigate our own Wikibase, we need to consider what approach we should take. Do we take a different approach? If so, how exactly do we be mindful of our own biases regarding gender, and, you know, what do we do about that? And, you know, there's a multitude of approaches to gender and sex that are very culturally specific, or, you know, time-based and all those sorts of things. And we need to consider the platform of Wikidata. And it's, you know, again, it's not one of the best places for working on gender equality and the workings of it. You know, the Homosaurus is a linked data dictionary out there that may be a great source for this. And I'd be interested if people have used it or how they've implemented it. So finally, the last part is operational. And this might be where we need the most help, because if we figure out ethics and conceptualization, we still need to figure out how we're going to turn this into actual practice. For one, there are technical questions involved in how we make sure that we have references that speak to gender in its many expressions. For the project I work on, we do have a Vivo instance that is already linked data where we could possibly add an option for researchers to self-identify. But even if we work that out and send our data children out into the world, it remains a possibility that this data will be challenged or edited or erased or used in ways that are regressive. And is it worth the risks for that? If we opt to send no data, our people-centric records may still be open to having sex or gender added by others. People might assume then that we're the ones sending that data out, even if we haven't. So that question of data provenance, or, you know, a way to understand the history of who made this data available, is a responsibility we think is a big one, and one worth considering. So that's kind of my section. I definitely have some questions about, you know, should we include sex or gender? Why have you considered it? Why have you not considered it, or considered not doing it? How would you model things differently? And what would the implications of that be? And then how do we weigh that kind of lack of control about our data once it's out there, especially in Wikidata, and the responsibility of being an authoritative source? So with that, I thank you for your time, and I hope you can give us some feedback, and I'll turn it over to Heidi Berthoud to talk about ethnic groups. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard, and welcome everyone. My name's Heidi Berthoud. I'm head of resource description, and I am here representing work I'm doing with Janet Stanley, the librarian for the Warren M. Robbins Library at the National Museum of African Art. So we've been working on a project to describe ethnic groups of Africa, and there are thousands. To start with and to focus our work, we're describing those ethnic groups that appear in our African art collections. So eventually we would like to partner with colleagues beyond our institution, and we've taken some preliminary steps toward building those partnerships. But we really needed to do more work educating ourselves and experimenting with Wikidata first, and that has taken us some time. So moreover, we realize the limitations of our current project. Though I have expertise with metadata, and Janet is an expert in the field of African art with decades of experience, Janet and I are not members of these communities, and we both recognize that developing deeper collaboration with the source communities will strengthen and legitimize the project. So first, the concept of ethnic group can be used in Wikidata as both an item and as a property. So for example, the Zulu people are an instance of an ethnic group, but then Nelson Mandela is a member of the ethnic group, the Tembu tribe. So for our project, we're using ethnic group as an item. So part of our metadata model is that we are including the statement instance of ethnic group for every Wikidata item that we create or we update. But there are many, many issues with this work and developing this metadata model. And I'm going to mention just a few here. So these ethnic groups are peoples with long histories, and these histories can be difficult to contextualize and describe. So there are difficulties in a geographic sense. There's a lot of movement of peoples over time. And our understanding is that those properties, location and indigenous to, that they're not really appropriate with use for ethnic groups. It seems possible to use country, but then you get into issues with describing groups using Western settler borders instead of traditional indigenous spatial boundaries. So that question of borders then that pushes you into histories of colonization. And we know that there are layers of colonization in Africa. And unfortunately, there seems no obvious standardized way in Wikidata to surface these histories. So we are in the process of thinking through new Wikidata properties for colonized or colonized by, to try and make clear the impact and interference of settlers. There's also the question of names and the power to name. So many of these peoples have multiple names or forms of their names, and there's a politics behind selecting that name. It would be really helpful to be able to understand the context behind different names. So right now, multiple names are given in that also known as field, but again, there's no contextualization there. There's no understanding of what that name may have been used for. And we aren't clear what kind of property we could use in our item records to start describing those contexts. The closest we could find was alternate name, which is P4970, but we really aren't sure if the property is meant to be used for this purpose. It's also used as a qualifier, so it still lacks some of that context we would like. So it might not be the best property here. Is there another property that's needed? Do we need to propose something new? Or do folks know of a property that we could be using? Or maybe we're just misunderstanding how to use the alternate name property. So if we could go to the next slide, I have some examples of difficulties around these names. And these examples come straight from Janet, our subject expert. So shout out, thank you so much, Janet, for these contributions. So as foreigners and Europeans began to transcribe African names into a variety of foreign languages, many different spellings began to appear in literature. So there are just numerous variations. Most ethnic groups had no writing system of their own and were orally based. So foreigners used their own language and used untrained interpreters who themselves had limited tribal language. So this hurried and uncritical approach resulted in incorrect names or even invented names. So the current nomenclature remains very confused. So some examples here, and some of these we have worked on, some are still on our to-do list. But the first here is the Chokwe people. And there are multiple spellings of this name. So in the literature of German, English, French, Portuguese, and Flemish, there's just an incredible number of spelling variations, more than 33. And we also see numerous prefixes and suffixes appended to the names. Next slide, please. Next example is the Asante people. Again, many different spellings, but Ashanti and Achanti are British spellings. Ghanaians use Asante. So this is an interesting example in that Janet has worked on this record and changed the label in Wikidata from Ashanti to Asante for this reason. But if you search Wikipedia, the Wikipedia entry is still under Ashanti, which is that British settler spelling variant. Next slide, please. So this example is the Mandinka people, though Manding people is the label Janet prefers. And again, there are multiple spellings here. So Manding is derived from Mand, a historically significant region in Upper Niger. We see lots of regional variants here, Mandan, Mani, Mali, and again, suffixes were appended to this name. Next slide, please. So the Frafra people, we have not worked on this record yet, but Frafra is a term purely invented by the British. It's a corruption of a greeting, Farafara. So some folks in the group kept that name. Other members of this ethnic group refer to themselves as the Gurensi. And to outsiders, people within this group are known as the Nankanse. And to quote from the Wikipedia entry for the Frafra people, the Frafra are a subset of the Gurensi people living in northern Ghana. The preferred name, and then a bracketed question, preferred by whom, question mark, for the group is the Frafra. Next slide, please. So we can see that there are lots of questions around names and variations of names and these colonial histories. And there are some questions here where we would really appreciate input from this group. So really, how can we decide a name, and who gets to decide the name when the name of a group has changed over time? How do we go about contextualizing all of these variant names? Because I didn't know any of these histories before Janet told me about them. And I would love for that information to make its way into Wikidata. What about peoples who belong to multiple ethnic groups, which I didn't even cover in my portion of the presentation here, but it has come up in the Chinese Ancestor Portrait Project. And then how can we surface those colonial relationships and make those colonial histories clear so we know where that interference and that influence was happening? So thank you so much for your time and attention, and I will now hand it off to Anne.
Good morning. Thanks, Heidi. I'm Anne Evenhaugen, and I'm an art librarian at the Smithsonian. Floruit, how the heck do you say that? And what the heck does it mean? Before I get to answering that, I wanted to describe another of our Smithsonian PCC Wikidata projects, using our amazing art and artist files collection as modeling practice. The collection in a nutshell is a large ephemera collection spread out over several branches of our system, and it contains important items related to an artist's work, which are individually too small to be treated like other library materials, to have a call number or an OCLC record, and they're not truly archival. But these items tell an important part of an artist's story. And as Catherine, Richard, and Heidi, and many others during this LD4 conference have so ably explained, working with humans in Wikidata can be so messy. And artists are human. As you can see from the next slide, we have kept track of the messy data on artists in our collection in many different ways. For life dates alone, circa, CA period, CA with no period, C period, approximately, flourished. It's truly impressive how many different ways our own professional librarians have used to describe when an artist was active. But this really isn't about our messy data. You have your own, I'm sure, but how we can ensure that we're able to best describe a person when we don't have all of their answers. And in Wikidata, our tools and our use seem limited. Next slide, please. With modeling our art and artist files project, we were looking closely at what we were going to put into Wikidata and what we're hoping to get out, especially when we're looking forward to our own Wikibase. When an artist was, whether it was when they were alive or when they were actively creating art, is a crucial characteristic. I may be working with an artist that I don't have a birth or death date. What I have in my hand is a postcard invitation dated from 1911 that says, please come to the opening and meet the artist. From that piece, I know that this artist was likely active in the early 20th century. And now I have a document that can be cited. But how should I represent that? And I have a lot of early 20th century artists, but if they all have different ways of representing that activity, birth date, death date, work period start, floroit, or just a postcard that notes they were alive in 1911, I'm going to have a rough time ensuring accuracy when I go to run a query. The properties in Wikidata haven't been quite as flexible nor as consistently used as we may have hoped. Next slide. If you use floroit as defined by Wikidata, it's a single point in time, and only if you don't have birth and death dates. So I'm throwing out this potential query out as one to point out some of the issues with both how we describe attributes in Wikidata and some of their limitations. So give me a list of Black American artists active in the 19th century. The intention of this query is to search for artists whose work period started or ended in the 19th century. And because artists born in the 18th century may or may not have been active in the desired time period, birth dates alone would not be helpful. The property flora wheat has a specific use. It's a date when the person is known to be active or alive when the birth or death date was not documented. The usage instructions also point to work period start and work period end, indicating use those properties if they're active for a period. Are the properties for work period start and end only used for individuals with known birth or death dates? The property proposal discussion left some questions unanswered. And regardless of flora wheat or work period, are we comfortable describing a 19th century artist as one who was potentially active with a start date of 1800 and an end date of 1899? Because 99 years is quite the artistic career. And also, how do I cite that? Here's the kicker. In fact, a survey of the results of a simple query for just African-American artists suggests that many records lack any work period information at all, whether work period start or end or flora wheat, which also points to the fact that we need to put more in and best figure out the way to do that. So our questions. Clearly, we're still struggling. So our team would love your input. How would you deal with some of these issues? We've primed the pump with a few questions in the Google Doc that's been linked to, and we'd love to hear more and continue the conversation. Let's all get on the same page and advocate for consistent uses in all of these properties that will work for our needs. Now I'm going to hand it off to my lovely colleague, Suzanne Pelsk. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. I'm Suzanne Pelsk, and I'm a metadata librarian at the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. And you've been hearing from my colleagues and some of the problems that we've hit. I'm going to take a little break here before we get into our discussion about Wikibase to address questions we've brought up so far. And we invite you to participate with us in answering some of these issues we have. Please share your thoughts in our Google Doc or in chat here in Zoom. And we'll begin the discussion by going back to this Chinese Ancestor portrait project. Also, I'll be scanning the participation list to see if anyone wants to raise their hand and unmute themselves. So Catherine, I believe on the Google Doc so far, we do have some comments regarding the ancestor names.
Yes, I see those. That's helpful. Thank you. David's question, actually, that was my question too. At one point, I did go hunting for a property for clan name, as in birth name, family name, clan name, but there is no property for clan name. So Carly's suggestion is, I'm a point well taken. I'm going to go back maybe and look and see if that would help us out of our dilemma. But my other thought is that we perhaps put in a proposal for a property clan name.
If anyone else has any comments or suggestions or issues along those lines, we really do invite you to either raise your hand and unmute yourself, use the chat or a Google Doc. In order to keep the conversation rolling here though, and not to run out of time, we're gonna move on to the sex and gender, which as we predicted would have some interest, especially since it is such a fraught topic. Richard, there's a long conversation going on here. Is there anything in particular you would like to address?
Thank you. Yes, I'm very happy to see that people have left comments. You know, one of the, on the one hand, like one of the most interesting questions I think I have is like whether we should track gender or not. And I'm curious if people, how people feel about that. And I definitely like seeing a lot of great information that can help us out in here in terms of resources that people have left. Thank you so much. I guess like the self-identification, has anybody done that? Is there anything that that you could help us out with? Do you think that like having that option in our Vivo would be helpful? I don't know.
I believe one person commented that self-identification versus having a reference source is sort of in conflict. And I thought that was, can you put the reference, I say so? I mean, I don't know how you do that.
Well, that's why I'm wondering if like having some sort of mechanism for people to self-identify in another data source then can become the citation. That if we have a page, a profile page, which has a person's self-identified pronouns or gender, could then become a way to cite it as well as let them work on it. You know, let them actually put forward their own identification. So, but it's an interesting area. I'm so glad that people are interested in this. Yeah.
So that's
anybody want to talk? Anybody want to say something? You can unmute.
Hello.
Please.
Join us in our chit chat. I am scanning for hands raised and trying to look at chat at the same time, which is not one of my best skills, but that's what I got assigned. I see a hand from Juliet. Please feel free to unmute.
Hi, yes, this is Juliet from the Philadelphia Museum of Art. I was just mentioned in the chat that I know there's a group of museums working on artist questionnaires. We are doing that ourselves. I know other museums have it established, but using that as a resource, at least for artists that can self-identify, is useful for us.
Thank you. That's so it's like just a questionnaire, like a survey almost, or
yeah, and so it gives them an opportunity to self-identify, you know, gender, sexuality, race, and we're also battling with the whole like ethics of do they want to be identified at all. We're also working on a prototype for some linked data work, and we're focusing on race, so we're doing Black artists' histories and representation. So although, you know, we're separating them by race, we've been having internal discussions, and it's been the statement that it's important to highlight and surface this above, because they've just been so underrepresented, and people want to know, you know, what works do you have by Black artists? So that's been the trajectory for our work.
I do think it's interesting, and I to relate this also to part of what Anne was talking about Black artists, African American artists, the ways in which it's only the other that is actually identified. So there's no effort to identify white, and so it's curious to think about the ways in which identification and labeling is often done without actually identifying the dominant group or the historically privileged group. So I think that's a very interesting discussion throughout all of this. And I know there are actually a few Wikidata tools out there that look at historic representation, and I'm curious if anybody knows any more. Please just throw them in our document somewhere, because I'd love to see that. So
I have noticed that some people are talking about, is it the role of the libraries to gather this data or not? And our panel here is heavily library and archives people that we're talking about, but we're thinking larger as the Smithsonian. So if not the libraries keeping or this information, where would this be in the GLAMs organization? Who should be the keeper of this information for maybe some artist who really wants to be identified after they pass? Who should keep that data? Who should be the valid source? If anybody wants to share any thoughts along those lines as well. I am going to need to move us along, I'm afraid, so that we can get to the ethnic groups and the between a rock and a hard space for sure that Heidi is finding herself in. Heidi, is there anything that you would like to address right now?
Well, I am looking at what's popping up in the now. So Carly, even if it's not fully a solution, I will take even half solutions. Thank you so much for this suggestion. I am just very interested in how to go about contextualizing these names without reinventing the wheel. And I would not consider myself a Wikidata expert by any means. So yeah, I will take any and all suggestions. So thank you so much for this named as, so that could have potential. And then I'm also seeing a comment from Magnus that, yeah, that you can do that start and end. The issue is there's no like clean temporal like cutoff. You know, a lot of these names are coexisting and are just being used in different circumstances, or have different spellings because of different layers of interference in the name, or are used, you know, by those inside the group versus those outside the group. So that's where that difficulty is, that there's nothing is clean, you know, nothing is like a nice sharp divide.
Magnus has his hand raised, so maybe he has a response, Heidi.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I can, sorry, my Swedish English, but I've been spending the last 4 years on Wikidata doing 1 million edits. And I see it as a social experiment. It's a crazy community. You can test a lot of things, but you never know what's happening. So what Wikidata needs is you as a domain expert, that you define how you see things. Because Wikidata will change. You will have always someone coming. I had a person from Italy who was merging things in Wikidata because he used Google Translate. So you can never trust Wikidata if we don't have the reference to the domain expert. So you should define how you would like to have it, I think.
So Magnus, my understanding is you're saying that you would like someone like Heidi and her team, Janet, to at least put something in that so that you can reference, either agree to or disagree with whatever messy boundaries they put in.
Yes, and the good thing with Wikidata and Wikipedia is that no one trusts this. So we need to have references to people who are trusted. Do you follow me?
Yes,
we have a problem. We have problem if someone just add something in a Wikipedia article. Then do you have a source for that? And we need the sources, so we shouldn't be the truth. So define. I'm so excited what you speak about, that you think in those terms, and the problem is that Wikidata is so big, it's so many people. If someone learns Python, they add 600,000 people. It's chaos, but
Yes.
it's a good chaos in some
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yes, if I may interject here, is that we need in some way have in the back of our mind that Wikidata is not a common space to share truth, but it's a place where facts can be verified, provided by references that substantiate that claim.
Boy, I sure would like to get into discussion about fact versus truth, but I don't think we have time here.
Yeah.
Magnus, I don't know if you have one more comment, but
Yeah.
we're running out a little bit out of time and we need to move on to the last group.
Yeah.
So, but
small comment is that there is a tool now from Wikidata for mismatch. I put it in the chat. So please be part of that and add, because then we can control in what direction it's moving.
okay, thank you. Thank
The
you for putting
mismatch finder, and I'm not 100% sure that they understand all the problems you speak about.
terrific.
They see it's the wrong date, c'est la vie, but you speak about much more mature linked data. Sorry.
No apologies, but thank you for putting that into our document, sharing that link. So we have just a few more minutes during this question answer section of our panel, and we're moving on down to Anne's fluorite issues. I wasn't sure if there was anything in particular, Anne, that you wanted to take a few minutes to address.
How do you pronounce it?
I have no idea. Does anybody else unmute? Somebody unmute and tell us how to pronounce it.
You can, yeah, I think it's fluorite, without being a Latin scholar. Yeah, if anyone has any comments. And I recognize that dates, people have worked out different ways. We're just trying to figure out how we're going to work out our policies for our own Wikibase. And we're looking at all the different ways they could be represented in Wikidata already, and finding that we need a few commonalities that reflect how the field uses them. So I appreciate everyone's comments. If you've got any extra to talk about, happy to hear.
So Anne, and quickly, just sort of, and we have some comments in our Google Doc. And one that caught my eye is that Katie Pierce-Meyer is using fluorite for architects. I don't know if she feels comfortable unmuting and talking a little bit about how she's using it.
Sure. This is Katie. I am using it, and actually it's a graduate student I've been working on a project with he's been using it. He did the research to suggest that it was the right field to use. And it's because we have a data set that identifies a lot of architects who are active on a particular building at a particular time, but we don't have other information necessarily about those architects. And we're using it in conjunction with other projects where we're taking people from our collections that we do have biographical information. And we may be fleshing out those records in a different way, but for the purpose of those that we only have this sort of very brief identification, we've been indicating that someone was active at a given time using fluorite or fluorite, or however you pronounce it, with the understanding that it is kind of an eternal, what did someone say? Like it's a ongoing pilot or something that's going to continue to grow. So our thought was, if we can put that out there, that at least gives us something to sort of hang other things on, or that other people could contribute to building out that record of a firm or an architect who is otherwise not represented at all. And so that was kind of our logic behind using that particular field.
That's great, thanks. And it sounds like the Frick is doing the same thing. They use whatever data point they have and use fluorite to describe it.
Yes.
All right, Carly.
Yeah, Carly, do you would like to speak?
Too busy doing the same thing with something else instead of just doing,
All right. I'm apologize. One, Magnus, you still have your hand up, just to let you know. I'm not sure if that's I think that's left up. Yeah, thank you. And so now I'm going to hand this over to Jackie. This does not mean our discussions are over. It means that we have just begun them. So I really do look forward to continuing these conversations wherever we can. So now I'll hand it over to Jackie.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for a lively discussion. Now we would like to switch gear to Wikibase. Wikibase is built on top of MediaWiki, the standard wiki software for collaborative editing and knowledge sharing. Wikibase is the infrastructure that empowers Wikidata, the global data repository that collects world's knowledge in a structured manner to benefit who seeks knowledge. And our wiki conundrum that we experience help us to better prepare when we set up to install a Wikibase instance locally. To start, our Wikibase must first adhere to the Smithsonian policies and satisfy our internal research and outreach needs. In addition, we look to continue building additional partnerships and relationships to advance the Smithsonian's contributions to long-term research outputs and impacts in the US and worldwide. Jean Gabi's sampling questions from the OCLC Project Passage report guided our process for data modeling. Some of our questions raised earlier remain open. What will be our reason for pursuing a Smithsonian-centric Wikibase? Are the privacy PII justifiable enough? Are we capable of addressing the aftermath, consequences from our decisions? What impact would it be about sharing? how much of it with external Wikibases, especially Wikidata. Is the Smithsonian an authoritative source for the statements we are creating and curating? The competency of our data modeling will impact how we expose and distribute our work, engage wider use and reuse on the open web. Our Wikibase instance seeks to accommodate our specialized collections needs, but it is by no means to stay behind the Smithsonian firewall. Currently, there are scores of Wikibase instances in operation, serving a variety of data formats and communities, such as Rhymezone ArtBase, digital archive of artists publishing, and some archival sites like enslaved.org, documenting the historical slave trade. They exemplify successful Wikibase installations for unique and specialized content. By enabling an API, Wikidata is served as an external data source to enhance and augment local collections. This API facilitates the integration of remote semantic web servers to interoperate with instances of Wikibase and Wikidata through Sparkle Query Service, supplementing data assertions for local entity description. The Smithsonian Wikibase pilot will likely very much to follow this model. We will start locally, but we aim to interconnect globally. The Wikibase technology stack offers open and flexible data models. It is suitable for general and or granular collection needs. It is a viable option for us to experiment link open data for constructing assertions for our collections. It has native multilingual support addressing our non-Latin scripts concern. It allows data to publish using the internationally recognized standards directly connecting users to items via web protocols. This greatly boosts the interoperability with heterogeneous datasets. These attractive features help us achieving one of our goals: avail our collections through digital solutions. Wikibase has a simple UI, a user interface for editing. Non-metadata professionals are comfortable in this space to create, curate entities description. The simplicity in UI design widens our staff participation, lends opportunity to deepen our professional knowledge, and develop further web-centric technology skills. New APIs are constantly added by the numerous volunteer developers who are passionate, ingenious, and skilled. These APIs increase functionality, improve data quality, and generate new workflow. One in particular is this tool, now part of the project schemas, deploy shape expression checks to control data quality. This tool may very well be a better tool over the current pairing of property constraint qualifier setup for quality control. More recently, we were made aware that this schema project could be used in a different direction for quality control. By way of a more granular user account setup environment, help us to determining which user can work on which claims and the statements to remain private or open to public. Though the last year, we were highly encouraged by several installations worldwide, especially the ones from Wikifying Authority and bibliographic data from DNB, the National Library of Germany, and BNF, National Library of France. Our journey was not at all rosy. The developers of the software from Wikimedia Deutschland offered two distinctive installation routes, manual and the Wikibase Docker suite. The latter have several essential components bundled into the software to ensure a smoother installation process and experience. However, the security framework at the Smithsonian has proven too hard to contend with. The Docker route, sadly, was not the option for us. Manual installation was one and the only solution. Before the pandemic, our IT team was already stretched. They were even more so throughout the period. With an extremely limited availability time they have during the installation process, our team constantly ran into issues and needed the just-in-time documentation for troubleshooting, such as deploying authentication via the OAuth platform for quick statements and SPARQL query service. Documentation was really hard to come by to resolve this issue on hand in a timely fashion. For manual installation, the APIs that are tied neatly to the Docker Suite package, they were needed individually added to the suite that we were installing. Our installation was finally up after months of trying and error. We have limited functionalities, but we are able to manually create properties and items. We are able to bulk load our quick statements and conduct SPARQL queries. It was, and it is a long-awaited and welcome accomplishment. We are looking forward to having other essential functionalities and features implemented and enabled for our user interface. Our ups and downs in the Wikidata, Wikibase journey gave us plenty of food of thoughts. They surface our needs and help us organize and learn to advocate on behalf of our users and collection in this space. And if you are pursuing a local version of Wikibase or other platform for your link open data project, will you help us and entertain the following questions? And you will find the link to these questions in the chat. How will you approach your data modeling to enable SPARQL queries to return the results you are expecting and to avoid the ones that you do not expect to return? How will you configure user accounts, allowing different levels of access and editing capabilities? Are you creating policies, documentations, and documenting the constraints in your environment? Are you leveraging constraints in other linked data systems when you query? And we look forward to look at your sharing in the Google Doc with us.
Thank you, Jackie, for explaining and showing our underbelly of our attempt to install Wikibase. If anyone would like to give some advice or comments or ask us some questions about our Wikibase installation, please raise your hand or fill in some information on our Google Doc. One of the things, as Jackie pointed out, Docker was not an answer for Smithsonian, and we did not have dedicated IT. As we said in the beginning, we were doing this during the pandemic, and the IT was incredibly stretched trying to get everyone to telework. So we really didn't have IT support. So I'll pause here for a moment before I throw it back to Richard for our closing. Does anybody have, Kara, you have your hand raised.
Hello, my name is Kara Long, and I'm the Metadata Technologies Coordinator at the Virginia Tech University Libraries. And I'm afraid I don't have any helpful suggestions or solutions for you. I just wanted to
Thank you anyway, then I'm going to just cut you off. No, sorry.
I just wanted to say we just stood up our first local Wikibase recently, also a kind of COVID pandemic project where we had a little bit of time. I wanted to just be in solidarity with you and say it's helpful to hear that other folks had similar issues that we were having. And I'm looking forward to see, how your work develops and what sort of resources you're looking at for data modeling.
That's great to hear as well, that we are not alone in our pain. And we could talk offline a little bit about how far you all have gotten and compare it to how far we've gotten. I am curious, as Jackie pointed out, if this is a linked data and not necessarily a Wikidata conference. Is there anyone that is willing to share other ideas besides the turnkey Wikibase solution that they found easy to become a Wikidata? I'm sorry, linked data. Boy, silence speaks wonders. Kara, your hand's still raised. I'm very tempted to call on you again. Oh, darn, you lowered it. Well, I think we will. We're running out of time anyway, so I'm going to throw it over to Richard for a little closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Suzanne. She's over on the West Coast, so she's doing this really early. So thank you for being up. So as a large GLAM organization, we feel there's a lot of potential for the Smithsonian to enrich the world with our linked data. Indeed, our first secretary, Joseph Henry, put it well. The worth and importance of the institution is not to be estimated by what it accumulates within the walls of its building, but by what it sends forth to the world. And let me tell you, there's a lot of stuff in the museum. So, but in our foray into linked data through the Project for Cooperative Cataloging's Wikidata project, we see the great promise in establishing a platform for adopting linked data and bringing down the silos of information that abound in our institution. The project has been a real learning adventure for us. And as this presentation is hopefully illustrated, there are still areas where we need to work further to incorporate linked data in our day-to-day operations. And of course, the people who are talking today are not the only ones struggling with this topic. We talked about the challenges of using names, whether to include gender or sex, how to describe ethnic groups, and what to do about time periods for artists. We've also spoken about implementing our own Wikibase and the challenges that has brought. What we haven't really focused much on in this presentation is the successes that we've achieved as a group. And we have learned so much about linked data and about Wikidata and Wikibase, and have gained a lot of practical experience working with linked data. And that has been really great for us as an organization. It really helps us move forward and take us to the next level. So, and so even if it makes us uncomfortable and definitely frustrated at times, these big questions we are asking are so important to the work we do. They also help give meaning to what we do. And really, that's very important, especially in COVID times. This has been a great opportunity to reconsider the descriptive practices we've been doing for decades now. And it also helps us envision a more equitable and respectful way to describe people in particular. We've learned that GLAM data, even for libraries, must support or provide a wide spectrum of issues. There's a lot of different pools out there for us to play with. Terminology needs to be adaptive to the needs of individual communities in GLAM, and the assumptions that come with those terms need to be worked on. And that silos of information do not need to stay silos, as has been the traditional way of doing everything. And as we move forward with our own Wikibase, we hope that your contributions here will help us produce something that lives up to Joseph Henry's admonition. So thank you so much. I just want to give credit to the full team of the Smithsonian Libraries and Archive staff who've worked on this. We've had a lively and active group of people that have been really moving us forward. And so I wanted to thank all of us. They're all in the slide there. And we also have a slide of references that Jackie showed where you can explore later. And I actually pasted those in the Google Doc too. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the conference. I know we have like 10, 15 minutes. I don't know if we want to chat or what. So thank you.
Well, I'm willing to stay on if there's anyone who does want to go back and address some of the other issues or something tangential that we talked about. I'm willing to stay on and chat if there's anyone else who would like to unmute and join me.
I got a question.
Yes.
So does the Smithsonian provide, is it owned by the US government? I'm not in the States, so I'm just sort of curious. I work for the government in Canada. I'm just sort of wondering about Wikidata as like an entity to sort of get information to the public better than our like library catalog. Just wondering if you're using it in that way at all.
Is there anyone who would like to try to explain the Smithsonian's relationship to the United States?
We're a trust of the United States government. So we are federally funded in a lot of the salaries and the buildings and maintenance of things like that. But we do have some independence. We don't follow every single order as other federal agencies, official agencies actually do. So we're a trust of the United States government. But in terms of your question about using it as a way to get more data out there, I think that, you know, it's a great tool for that. It's got millions and millions of records in there. So it's a place where people can go. It's a really amazing knowledge graph. So I don't know if other people, please come in, talk. Diane, I see you.
There's different wiki projects going on throughout the Smithsonian and not necessarily coordinated. As we poke at it, trying to figure out what we're supposed to do, how we can leverage that tool to reach our secretary's goals of everyone. So we are trying to leverage all that we can to expose what we believe is accurate information.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer you, Matthew? Provide more questions?
I have a,
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Sorry, this is Catherine Phillips. I have a little more for Matthew's question. We've been noticing over the last 5 years or so, we'll get reference queries from places like Iran or the Czech Republic or God only knows where they've clearly somehow stumbled across some data element that tells them that we have X. So for the ones that get as far as us, meaning the reference library to us, we can then help them through our own personal, institutional, and database knowledge, find all the other related objects that the Smithsonian relevant for their query. But a lot of that, it shouldn't be, my feeling is it shouldn't be dependent on finding a librarian who's been there forever to get you linked up to the resources that you need for your research project. I would really see Wikidata as a way to increase the person in wherever, the Czech Republic's ability to see that we have multiple instances of something on this topic, be it books, objects, archival resources, or data sets.
Thanks. I guess building on that, so do you find linked data as a better way to do that than like traditional archive records or library records or museum records? It's sort of been like a dream for many catalogs to sort of have more linked data, but implementing it has been a challenge.
I don't know if it will work, but I do see that part of our problem is that we have so many different units. Somebody was looking for some Egyptian papyri, I don't know, about a month ago, not a month ago, about a year ago, time flies. And what didn't surface, but surfaced, I happen to know an ancient Near Eastern art curator who was working over at Natural History. So he told me that not only was there Egyptian papyri at the Freer and Sackler, there's a small collection, but that they had it over at Natural History in the anthropology department. And it turns out that the work the person was looking for was actually at anthropology, not at Freer Sackler. That kind of linkage where you could see what the entire Smithsonian has would save a lot of research time, I would think. And I don't know that it will work, but I think that's what we're looking at trying to make happen.
Diane, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something we hadn't even gotten into really in this discussion, but that we're also kind of perplexed by is how to model the museum buildings or the museum research centers versus like what's in them, what units they have, subunits, that sort of thing. And that's also very confusing because in Wikidata, there's different ways that places have been, they'll combine both the building as an architectural structure and the agency in it and the collections, or sometimes they're all separated out. So this whole idea of, especially like what is federal government, who owns things, it's really very complicated.
The question I kind of heard as an undertone is linked data the answer to help us connect everything? And I have been following linked data for a really long time now, and I am very excited to see it go into production in the library world, entering into the world of shared data, not in their own weird language, in their own old systems. I just don't know if it's the answer.
This is Jackie. I was just thinking that about, linked data versus the different platforms that could be offered in our experiment right now. We are focusing on Wikidata, Wikibase. And the reason for that in some way is that it's simplicity. And the design of the interface seems to be less complicated to engage a wider participation, staff participations. Now, having a technology such as Wikibase, Wikidata, we have the HTTP URI that we could make use of to connect various different data sets. And that in some way is using the semantic web technology to help navigate from one to the other with much less human intervention, but more relying on machine processing and manipulating the data for resources representation on the web. So we are hoping, we are excited because a lot of APIs has been created by so many experienced developers. So looking into this data structure, this software, to this system environment, and trying to bring out the characteristics and the treasure of the things that have been put into this repository. And I think we are energized by the possibility, but we do not believe it is the one and single solution.
Thanks, that's good.
There are various comments being put into the Google Doc that I'd like to say thank you very, very much for these comments. The people who are making comments in chat, we're trying to record them into our Google Doc so that we have a record of them as well there, so that when chat goes away. Is there anything else that anyone who is still on the call, you're still on the call for a reason? I was hoping you might tell me why you're still here.
I just wanted to mention, we don't have any firm plans yet, but we are thinking of trying to write an article or do something based on our considerations and discussions. So that's, we appreciate your helping us to think through these issues.
I hope that you all enjoyed hearing that we haven't solved these things, and this, instead of coming and telling you the answer, showed that this is really hard. And when you think you have an answer, someone throws you something that blows it up.
And with that, we're going to delete the Google Doc now. I think this, I hope this format was very helpful for people. It has been great to think through it and to get your feedback and to know that we're not alone in a lot of these questions that we're struggling with. As a group of people, I hope we can work on it together and get somewhere.
Smithsonian has this unfortunate name recognition, so that we then feel obligated that whenever we put data out there, that it is vetted and true. and linked data just isn't. And especially Wikidata where anyone can edit, as Magnus was saying. Oh, Nancy Falgren, yeah, thank you very much for attending.
One comment from Magnus here.
Yes.
Yes.
You need, I don't know how much you use Wikidata, but it's crazy. It's
know.
more than crazy. For example, we had machine learning, and then you should help to say if it was a good change they have done or not. And I think 9 out of 10 suggestions I got was in a language I didn't understand what was a character. So it's so crazy that it scales so much.
Yeah, it took off, didn't it?
It hasn't. It's still a young boy, I think.
It's still probably a toddler learning how to walk, the pace of walking.
Yeah. I have a small dream to work at Google just to see what they have done, because I think they have done 100 times more. It's crazy. I was in Bali last year, and then I was sitting in the taxi, and they knew everything about the how many cars was on the street and so on. So we haven't seen the start yet.
And you know, the reason why perhaps a Wikibase for our collection is needed, and also to consider the ontology you want to apply for accommodating your data sets. You know, there are several different Wikibases using a variety of ontology. You know, there are some make use of BitFrame ontology, and some using RDA ontology. And so it will be really interesting in the very near future to see how we each, applying different sets of ontology, can make use of a Sparkle query servers to really interconnect with one another.
And the challenge is also to understand the different domains, how they should work together.
That is precisely the point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
the problem,
true.
I have created about 10, 15 properties in Wikidata, and it takes weeks. My background is that I was an IT architect. Then you did 10 properties per hour or something like that. So it's much, much better to have your own Wikibase where you can trust what's in there and that you can design it what you think is good. So use Wikibase. Maybe it's not the best technology, but it's much better to have your own data, I think.
That's our goal.
That's our goal.
Yeah, that's been the main point. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks
time,
everyone.
so.
Have a great
go.
rest of your conference, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. See you later.
Thank you.